Who the hell is taking up the airwaves?
35 years into the band's existence, they've released a record that matches the raw power of their very first. Right now, I'm very happy to welcome Metallica drummer and songwriter Lars Ulrich to Studio Q. Hi, Lars.
Thank you for having me. Hey.
Pleasure to have you here, man.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here in the company of great musical artifacts.
Yeah, Glenn Gould's piano.
So is there a history behind that drum kit then? Come on.
Well, there will be.
I don't even think about it.
Lars, 10 studio records. Most bands get excited when they release their first record because they got to put out a record. When they release their second, they're excited that they got to release a second, that anyone wanted them to release a second. 10 studio records as Metallica. What does surviving 10 studio albums as Metallica mean to you?
Wow. Well, 35 years in, the fact that anybody still cares, the fact that people still show up, the fact that I get invited to places with studios with musical artifacts is awesome. So it's, 35 years later, it means a lot. I mean, I'd say that it actually means more than it used to because nowadays we have our eyes are wide open and we sort of take all the good energy and the good vibes in. And the fact that, I said this to my dad the other day at Thanksgiving. I said, I'm about 5 years older now than you were when I thought you were old. Yeah. And I remember, when my dad was in the late 40s, I was like, man, my dad's getting pretty old. Yeah. I'm 5 years older than that now. And the fact that we're still making records, the fact that we're still playing shows, big or small, that anybody shows up at, and the fact that people still care. And like you said, there's lots of good buzz around this record. So it's a pretty awesome thing. Who would have thought that I'd be sitting here talking to you in my early 50s and all that was still going on. So it's a great time to be alive, even though the world is obviously slightly spinning out of control. But so we're thankful and appreciative of all that. So.
When you were making those first records, when you were making, say, Kill 'Em All, were you in any way thinking that this might be something you do for the rest of your life? This would be a career move that you would be 50? Was that a hope?
When I think back on those years, looking into the future was just not something that was part of – it wasn't on the radar. You were just so – preoccupied with everything that was just in front of you at that time. Yeah. I don't remember ever sitting and thinking about, what's coming or, obviously when you're 18, 20 years old, I guess it was 19 when we made Kill 'Em All, you never think about mortality. You never think about any of that stuff. You're just so in the moment thinking about, where's the next beer, all that kind of stuff. And so at that time, we were just, the fact that we got out of California was like a major achievement. We formed the band in Southern California, and then quickly moved up to Northern California, where we felt there was much more of a sort of receptive atmosphere to the type of stuff that we were doing. And then within another 6 months, we got invited out to the East Coast. It was like, it went really quick, and we were out on the East Coast making a record, and we started touring in the summer of '83 all across America. I was 19 years old, and it went so quick that we never slowed down long enough to think.
I've heard you say that because you played the Soviet Union in '91.
Yes, when it was still the Soviet Union.
When it was still the Soviet Union, but right during the kind of cracks in the Soviet Union.
Well, yeah, the show was actually part of a so as the wall came down and a lot of the Eastern European Iron Curtain thing was crumbling and all that, and then by the time the unrest or the standing up to the government and so on reached the Soviet Union in the summer of '91, and the students were protesting, there was a deal that was cut with the students that I don't know the details of it, but basically in return for something the students were giving up, they would get a rock concert.
Right.
So Metallica and AC/DC and the Black Crowes came to Moscow. And this is still when, the Soviet Union was, quote Ronald Reagan, the evil empire. And it was crazy. We were there at the height of all that. Even though obviously it was sort of starting to tremble a little bit. But it was like, wow, we're like in Moscow, and we were there for a couple, 2-3 days, and it was otherworldly.
Yeah.
Now when you go there, there's as many Starbucks on every corner as there is,
Yeah.
just down on the street here outside in Toronto. But back then, I mean, it was like you were on another planet, and we played a show with AC/DC, and I was doing an interview earlier with somebody who said there was 1.6 million people there. I don't know if it was quite that many. It was a lot of people.
A lot of people,
There
yeah,
was
yeah,
somewhere,
yeah.
maybe it was 500,000, maybe it was 1 million. Who's counting?
It looks like a lot of people when you watch the
Yes.
video. Yeah.
It was really cool. It was really cool.
And 35 years into your band, a lot of bands that have been around that long, well, they might either start slowing their music down, might start doing a few more lounge sets, might start doing a few more acoustic numbers, might start just doing the greatest hits tours. Not only have you not done that, but you've made what I think is your heaviest record in a really long time. What is a double record, like 80 minutes long. At this 35 years in, where's that power still coming from?
From eating my Wheaties every day. I guess it's sort of in our DNA. I mean, when we play music together, it just sort of, I've spent the last 6 weeks flying around doing interviews and doing promotion, and obviously on a daily basis I get asked variations on that question. I don't have I don't feel that we're particularly, we used to be quite sort of, there was a driven element to us. It was like we wanted to take our music and show the world, we're not driven anymore. Like I said, we sort of look around in disbelief nowadays, going like, wow, people still care. I mean, it's all almost sort of bewildering
Really?
that we're still this successful.
Yeah.
To me, it is,
Yeah.
But when people say, like, where does it come from? I mean, it's not like we sit down around a table like this and go,
Put your hands in the middle of
now we gotta make another record, and 18 months from now I'm gonna be up at CBC talking, doing an interview, and I'm gonna shove it right back in his face and go, you know what? We just want to prove to the world, and all this type of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, when we get together in a room and write songs, this is sort of what happens. This record certainly, maybe on the last record, on Death Magnetic, there was a little bit more of a mission statement. Wig Rubin came in, and there was a lot of talks, and we sort of thought things through, and he encouraged us to do some different things. But this record, literally, James and I started writing songs, and then Greg Fiddleman showed up 6 months into that songwriting process and started tweaking some of the songs, and then we recorded. But there was no, like, what are we doing? Or, let's get back to the roots or any of that stuff.
But what does that give you? I mean, a lot of bands go in, especially like after they made a few records, they have an idea of what they want to do when they go into the studio. What does that mean when you go into a studio without a mission statement? Does it feel more freeing? Does it feel different? Does the music that comes out of it, is it different when you don't have Rick Rubin in there saying, here's the reason we're going to make this record?
That's a good question. When you make records, when you make new records, I should say, you make records of new material as infrequent as we do. The one thing that there's never a shortage of in this setup is material. We have a lot of material. We have a bunch of very prolific songwriters, and so there's enough stuff. So by the time we get to it, it's just, I guess you're so like, let's go. We did the Lou Reed thing. We did the movie. We've played every single festival known to mankind. We played every continent that's been discovered. We've done all that. It was like, now let's write some songs. So we just showed up, and that's good. Let's start working on that. I've been trying. I was talking to a guy in Belgium an hour ago, and it was like, so how do you write songs? Like, can you try to explain to me, like, how do you identify like a good riff versus like not a good riff? It's like, you're a journalist. Like, how do you pick the questions you want to ask me? How do you, I don't know if you're a writer.
I'm a musician.
How do you write? You're a musician. It's just, this is what we do. And so we sort of instinctively, I guess, know the good riffs from the not so good riffs. And it's trial and error. So maybe there's 10 good riffs and 8 of them work in songs and 2 of them don't work in songs. They fall to the wayside. Then there's another 10 riffs and then 8 of those get turned into songs. I mean, do you know what I mean? It's, I was reading an interview with Damon Albarn a couple of years ago
From Blur.
from Blur, who
Gorillaz, yeah.
said like something that's stuck with me. He said, sooner or later, I'm not quoting him, but more or less, sooner or later, you just got to show up at the studio and you got to put the time in.
Yeah.
It's not like, you're in bed at 3:30 in the morning and all of a sudden like the roof opens up and like the hand of God like just throws like 50 riffs down at you. I mean, sooner or later, you just got to get down to the studio, right? And you got to like put the time in.
Yeah.
And
The riff god. I like that a lot.
Wouldn't
Showing
that be
up.
great?
Here you go. No.
We all have that to look forward to. Meanwhile, we have James Hetfield, who's almost as close to that.
He is the riff god.
He is the riff god. Absolutely, trust me. But sooner or later, you just got to get down to the studio. And you got to just sit there, and James is there, and I'm here. Okay, here's a drum beat. Play that riff, and off we go. Does that work? Yeah, it's pretty good. Now let's try to put this part with it. It's like, it's just work.
The music that you play 35 years ago, 30 years ago, 25 years ago, it's different music than you're making right now in some ways. And what people forget is that you still have to play that music an awful lot. Well, Neil Peart said something interesting. He said something in the Rush documentary that he said, of course I got to stop playing eventually. He said, if I was playing like Charlie Watts, maybe I wouldn't have to, but I'm Neil Peart. I'm playing pretty heavy, it gets to you. When I think about that, I think you did that to yourself. I mean, you wrote that.
Yeah.
How have you physically survived playing that kind of music for 30-odd years?
I would say that so far we're scraping by. Thanks for asking. It's actually every night when we come to the part right before I go, okay, all right, send all your blood to the legs.
Really?
Okay, start,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's it's not the easiest part of the 2.5 hours, that particular section you played there, but most of the nights I managed just about to play it. Listen, when people ask me to look into the crystal ball into the future,
Yeah.
what do you think? What does it look like? Are you still going to be playing? It's the great big unanswered question, and it's the only thing, mentally, creatively, spiritually, aesthetically. We'll go for another 100 years. We're fine. Thanks for asking. Physically, obviously, it's the big question. I was at Desert Storm. Desert Storm.
You fought in Desert Storm?
Yes, I did.
I remember
Let me
that.
tell you.
Yeah. Charlie came after you, right?
I was at Desert Trip. We'll try that. See, I've been trying really hard in the last few weeks to not call it Oldchella like everybody else calls it. So I'm just I was at Desert Trip.
You went to Desert Trip. This is
Yeah.
the Bob Dylan,
Stones.
Roger Waters.
Yeah, Neil Young.
Neil Young. How was it?
It was great.
Yeah.
It was great. But so I was there for the weekend, and there's these 6 acts on, and they're great. But there was one thing I did spot was that of the 6, and they're all apparently like all in their 70s. I fact checked that, but that's what I was told. There was only one of the 6 acts that had the OG drummer.
Oh, really?
Right, yeah. The other 5 acts had a drummer like in the 20s and the 30s. So that should tell you something,
Yeah.
right? So only Charlie was there, and he's fabulous. And I've seen the Stones, 50 times in the last couple decades. They're great. But like Neil is saying, what he does is a little bit different. It's a little more in the jazz. There are lots of jazz drummers, Elvin Jones and Max Roach and all these Tony Williams. All these guys are still playing. We're still playing up in their 70s and 80s. Whether we can do the Fight Fires and the Batteries and the Master Puppets and all that in our mid-60s and our early 70s remains to be seen. And there's a kind of a second part to that, which is that we may be able to still play them. Do you know what I mean? But whether we can bring the weight and whether we can bring the energy and whether we can bring the sort of the attitude that those songs deserve in our 60s to 70s, I have no idea.
Right.
Hopefully,
Yeah.
we'll have enough clarity to be able to tell if it's not working, to walk away from it graciously and respectfully. But right now, we're fine. and we've played some of our best shows in the last couple of years, and I think there's still a bit left in the engine. But whether we can do it in our 70s, hopefully we'll get a chance to find out.
Yeah.
But we have some of the hardest working people on our team are a couple guys that travel with us that stretch us out and sort of stitch us back together.
Ask, are you doing yoga? Are you moving around before you play?
Kirk's the one that does yoga. I'm more of a I get stretched and I get like massaged a little bit. I mean, it's kind of like unfortunately, it's kind of like a sports team now. It's actually kind of pathetic. People come backstage, where's Jack Daniels? There's no Jack Daniels.
Brown rice.
Brown rice and nasty protein shakes and a couple of trainers that are stretching us and stitching us back together again after the show. But at least we're still playing, and at least we're still functioning, and at least it still has sort of some of the weight that it used to. So far, so good. So we'll see where it takes us.
I don't want to read into lyrics too much, but in the first single, the title track from Hardwired to Self-Destruct, James sings, and I gotta do this in the public radio appropriate language. So
would you like me to beep you? I could beep you.
I'm gonna try.
If you say I can beep you, try it.
Want to beep me?
Yeah.
We're so
beep.
We are
beep
out of luck. Yeah. Hardwired to Self-Destruct.
You say the last one. Yeah.
We made it. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that song. I'm interested to hear that song. I'm interested to hear where that song came from.
Unfortunately, as much as I would tell you that it's the soundtrack to the crazy political times that we're living in, and maybe I should say that, but it really isn't, or at least it wasn't given birth to in that sense. We finished the record in May. And I took the record home over the weekend, and I thought we didn't have an opening song. So we came back on Monday, and basically, long story short, we wrote an opening song really briefly. Let's keep it short and sweet and to the point.
Yeah, classic Metallica in some ways.
We wrote and recorded that track in like 3 or 4 days, like Monday through Thursday of the following week. Now we have an opening song. And then James had this thing about how it's sort of somewhat inherent in most people who, do want to do good or do better or whatever. But what if we're sort of hardwired that, that the choices that we made are sort of, they're wired within us. It's part of our DNA to beep up, to screw up instead of to do the right things. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And literally it was like, that sounds great. Done. And we wrote and recorded it, like I said, in less than a week. Then when it came out in August, that's the first track, all of a sudden people started associating it with the crazy ways that the planet's spinning out of its axle right now. And I think that, for me it's important that Metallica music, there's no right or wrong way to listen to Metallica music. There's no right or wrong way to listen to any music or interpret anything creatively or artistically. So if that's what people make of this song, I'm not going to sit here and tell them that they shouldn't do that. But it certainly wasn't given birth to as now we're going to write an anthem for the fall of 2016.
Right.
But I think the great thing about James's lyrics is how ambiguous they are most of the time and how people can take almost any of the lyrics and work them into something that fits their vision of the world or their vision of their own set of issues or problems or their day-to-day or whatever. And I think the best art really is has that kind of ambiguity to it. So if that's what people want to do with this, then I'm very happy that people won't do anything with our music at this point.
If you're just tuning in and you're wondering who I'm talking to,
who the hell is taking up the airwaves?
I'm talking to the drummer and co-songwriter Metallica, Lars Ulrich. It's funny we're talking about James's lyrics because Hardwired to Self-Destruct, I mean, it could describe another set of lyrics in the band. I heard that Kirk Hammett, the lead guitarist in the band, he had a bunch of ideas for songs on his phone and he lost all the ideas. That must have been devastating.
That's what I've been told, yes. Yeah, that is one of the stories that accompany this cycle, yes.
You sounded a little skeptical.
No, listen, Kirk, I believe, lost his phone. I was with him. We were somewhere. We were doing a photo session, and he also lost I don't know if it was the same phone or different phone. So boys and girls, just don't put any, cool musical ideas on your phone, comma, without backing them up at least. Okay, seriously. I mean, didn't we get that part in like tech school somewhere?
Yeah.
Always back up your unique ideas. But he did lose his phone, yes, and he sat most of the writing sessions for this album out.
The story of Metallica by now is well documented. More documented than most bands. Even though you survived Kirk losing his song ideas, really the band, if you go back, if you look in the history of the band, you guys have survived a lot of things. I mean, you and Kirk and James had to survive the death of Cliff Burton, the first bass player. I mean, that could easily break a band. You're this far out now from the death of your pioneering member. When you look back now with that distance, I mean, how close were you guys to not surviving that?
When I look back to that time in '86, continuing never felt like it wasn't. Never felt like it was not continuing. Never felt like it was an option. We, when you're, I guess I was 22 at the time.
Wow.
I don't think you're capable of processing grief and loss at that level. So we just did what we would do every day back then. We just jumped into the bottom of a vodka bottle.
That's where the Alcoholica.
Yeah, that was sort of, I guess, our nickname back in the day. But we just jumped a little further in after the accident. I mean, not to make light of it, but we weren't capable of processing that loss. So the only option for us was to continue. And we were pretty sure, and I still am to this day, that obviously Cliff, our dear bass player who we lost, would have encouraged us, obviously, to move on. But we were back up on our feet literally in 2 or 3 weeks, and we auditioned bass players, and we're back on stage touring in Japan 6 weeks later. Wow. I mean, just to say that now at 52, 30 years later, that sounds like crazy. I mean, it takes me 6 weeks to brush my teeth nowadays or get out of bed, you know what I mean? Yeah. But the fact that we could do that at that time was pretty nutty. But we weren't capable of processing any of what happened in any other way, so we just continued.
When do you feel like you finally did process it? Did that time ever come where you look back and said, we didn't quite process it, we just toured through the pain, we toured through the grief?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, there was the movie Some Kind of Monster, all those the years 2001, 2, 3, I guess. That was the first time in the band's history, which was basically 20 years in, where we got a chance to sit down and almost process anything. There was so many things that none of us had talked about, communicated, engaged in how we were feeling. I mean, Metallica was this machine that just rolled across the land, taking no prisoners, that kind of thing.
Pirates,
but at the same time, we were we were unaware of the fact that we were also getting caught up in the machine ourselves. The band members were being sort of sucked into that vortex ourselves, just as anybody else was. And we finally sat down in like 2000 and started, it was basically Jason Newsted, our bass player who replaced Cliff. It was his departure that instigated a lot of this stuff, because we were kind of sitting there basically like, why would anybody want to leave Metallica? Mm-hmm. And then when we started talking to him about it and got to the bottom of the inner band dynamics and the inner band sort of politics and the rules and all that kind of stuff that were keeping this thing afloat, we started like, wait a minute, that's nutty. And then one thing led to another, and then Hetfield had his own personal demons that he had to deal with, and he went away for a year and dealt with all that. And so it was a crazy time, but that was really the first time where we sat down and dealt with any of this. And it took, by the time all the dust settled, it was probably 5 years to about 2005. But since then, so I guess it's been 11 years. We've had, I would say, the best 11 years we've ever had.
Those years have been marked with some like it's a lot of criticism of everything you put out. I mean, thinking back to this today, your band can be accused of not being metal enough. Your band can be accused of being too metal. Your band can be accused of having strange mastering issues. You get criticized for drum sounds. It sometimes feels like Metallica gets criticized more than other bands do. Why do you think that is?
Because of our good looks.
It's because you're so handsome.
It's probably, because we're so handsome.
Yeah, that's probably it. Just jealousy.
People, exactly. You have to throw something at,
They're so damn handsome. We got to talk about the mastering.
It goes back to on Ride the Lightning in 1984 when people got to track 4 of Ride the Lightning. Is that an acoustic guitar?
Yeah.
Is that acoustic guitar I hear in the distance? And people like literally within the metal community lost their lunch. I mean, it was like we had somehow like turned our back. We had somehow like crossed some boundary. There was an acoustic guitar on a Metallica record. We had just basically given the middle finger to the whole metal world. And it's been a very strange thing because I think we've just refused from the left, from the right, from any place, from the metal world, from the pop world, we've just refused to conform. And we've always looked at ourselves as outsiders, and we've never really felt like we belong to any particular one thing, even to the hard rock and metal world. We've always been kind of at odds with a lot of the status quo in that, and the sort of conservative dynamics that sort of, you should put the same record out, and you should look a certain way, and you should act a certain way, and
that never mattered to you.
You should have these degrading views about women or about it's all that type of stuff. We've just never wanted to be the kind of misogynistic heavy metal cliche bands with swords and sorcerers and women in bikinis and all that type of stuff. It's just never been who we were. So we've always been at odds with like most people around us because we've just always considered ourselves to be fiercely autonomous and fiercely independent. And it's kind of, I guess, who we are, just a couple of disenfranchised misfits still trying to figure it all out 35 years later.
But that being fiercely autonomous has gotten you into trouble. I know that I hate to bring it up, but I want to bring it up in a different way. I mean, you were very vocal about Napster, about file sharing when Napster first came out. It was pitted in the
Napster,
media.
that rings a bell.
It's I believe Napster. It's a card game.
Oh,
yeah.
Napster. Yeah.
It's a sleep app.
Gotcha. Well, depending on what music you're playing.
Oh my lord!
Ding.
You were against Napster. There was put in the media it was Metallica versus Napster. But now we live in a time where you can stream any song, pretty much any album for free on your phone for a $10 a month subscription. Do you feel like you may have been a bit of a canary in a coal mine in this? Do you feel like you may have seen this coming?
Well, I mean, the issue wasn't about streaming. The issue wasn't about the internet. The issue wasn't about downloading. The issue wasn't about file sharing. The issue was whose choice is it?
Ownership.
So right. So if I write a song, or you and me write a song, right? You and I we write a song together, right? Now we want to give it to the world for free. Whose choice should that be? I mean, the obvious answer would be that it should be mine and yours choice. Mm-hmm. But that choice was taken away from us by a third party called Napster. So when that showed up on the radar, it was like, oh, wait a minute, something's wrong with this picture. Let's go after these guys. That felt like a street fight. And then what they did was they turned it around and made it between us and our fans, or we're taking that away from. So they turned the whole issue on its head. Metallica, these greedy rock stars. We're not greedy rock stars. We're just like, we like to control what we do, and we want to give our music away for free. We'll give it away for free, but that should be our choice.
Right.
And so 15, 16 years later, I mean, nothing's changed. We give our music to Spotify, and we give it to Apple Music, and we give it to Google Play, and we give it to all kinds of people. But it's our choice.
Do you like doing that? Like, in many ways, the story of Metallica is like a band, scrappy upstart, and then major label success, and now this most recent record's on your own label. Like, the story of Metallica, in some ways, is largely the story.
We like to share our music with our fans in the way that's the most convenient for most of them to get it.
Yeah.
So if Spotify, I have a Spotify app on my phone. I use it. I wouldn't say I use it every day, but I use it multiple times a week.
Yeah.
I go on YouTube multiple times a day. That I can guarantee you. And I listen, to Apple Music and think, Apple products are the coolest thing in the world. That's not the issue. The issue is just whose choice. So obviously we just put out 12 videos for every song on this new album on YouTube for free. It's our choice. So we just want to get our music to the fans in the way that we feel it is the right way for us to communicate the music to our fans. But 16 years ago, Napster came and intervened in that organic connection between us and the fans. Said, hang on a second, we'll take your music and we'll give it to whoever wants it for free. I was like, wait a minute, how about asking us first? I mean, that was the argument in its simplest form, and then it sort of took on a world of its own.
That brings me to an interesting point, and maybe this is a good place to close, because we talked a lot about Metallica's survival, and you just mentioned that your music goes up on Spotify and Apple, and you want people to be able to get it wherever they can. As someone who has been around for a while in the music industry, and we have to remember that the music industry is a young industry. A lot of changes have happened in a very short amount of time. Like, what if you were starting today? Do you think it's possible for four guys playing guitars, playing bass, playing drums to make it as far as you guys have, again, starting today?
It's a great question. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to answer that. Because it's a different, the role of the rock band, the collective. I went to see a movie a couple weeks ago called American Honey. Mm. It's a great film. Mm-hmm. It's about a bunch of disenfranchised teenagers who are 16, 17, 18-year-old on a road trip through deeper south of America, and driving along, and basically all the scenes in the car are set to rap music. That's what they're listening to. They're listening to sort of like rap, R&B, what's popular today. A lot of great stuff, a lot of really cool, a lot of extremely talented people. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, in that movie, they would have been driving along on their road trip, and they would have been listening to Van Halen and to Kiss and to the Eagles and to, I don't know, the Judas Priests of the world or whatever, right? Now it's a different thing. So it's just a different time. People, like the rock band, the collective of 4 or 5 guys playing music, all for one for all that stuff, it's kind of not really as prominent as it used to be. So more solo artists, more music that comes from a kind of an R&B background, rap, soul, hip hop, all that stuff is just the prominent thing. Whether rock will come back and make a resurgence or not, as a rock guy, I should say, you watch in a couple of years right here on, CBC, it'll be, rock bands again and all that stuff. But I'm not sure. So we'll have to see how it plays out. I just don't know. So when you say, like, what would I say to stick with what you're doing, hang in there, play music, but whether to begin with, why, when we started Metallica because we wanted to play music together. We didn't start Metallica because we wanted to, have #1 albums and, all that stuff. So if whatever your motive is, if your motive is you want to just play music and connect with other people, great. If your motive is you want to, be in a rock band and be #1 all over the world and all that stuff, I say, I don't know if that's going to happen just because of the life and times that we're in. There's nothing wrong with that. Mm-hmm. But what's your motive? If your motive, and I'm not saying there's a right motive and a wrong motive, it's just figure out what your MO is and then, be comfortable with however it plays out.
Lars Ulrich, thanks so much for talking to me today.
Thank you for having me.
It was a real pleasure for me, man.
We're right back at you.
Yeah, cool. Thanks a lot.
Okay, we're going to write a song together, right?
We're going to write. You play drums, I'll play piano. What do you think?
I'll play piano, you play drums.
Oh, yeah, this will go great.
Okay, all right.